Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here's Shehan J. Haraja and Bobak Hayeri.
Hey everybody, it's the College Football Survivor Show. I'm Bobak Hayeri with my co-host Shehan J. Haraja, national college football writer for CBS Sports. We're glad to have you with us. Today, we're continuing our tour examining all the teams within the Power Four conferences. We've already covered the ACC and Big 12, so be sure to check those previous episodes if you haven't already. But now it's time for the Big 10, the bigger 10. Bigger conferences means bigger shows, and today we actually have two guests. Our first will be Stephen Means of Cleveland.com, followed by Bob Flounders of Penn State, PennLive.com. We'll be talking to Stephen for the first half of the episode and then Bob. But before we dive in, let me remind all of you that you can find us on X and TikTok at CFB Survivor Show, where we have video highlights of the show, run polls, and listen to your feedback. Please take a second, if you can, to like, rate, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. So here's our format. We're going to run through each team. Our guest and Shehan will let us know their thoughts on them, and then they're going to rank them and put them in kind of a grouping, either college football playoff contenders, middle-class teams, or bottom-tier teams. And at the end, our guest will pick their best player in the conference, regardless of the position, as well as their most underrated player in the conference, if we have time for that. I know we've got a little bit of a time crunch with our first guest, but our first guest is Stephen Means, a lead Ohio State football and basketball writer for Cleveland.com and co-host of the Buckeye Talk podcast. Stephen, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I've actually been listening to you guys for quite a while here because my former colleague Doug used to be on this podcast, so I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad we finally got the chance to have you on. Look, I mean, I think that we've missed a little bit of Ohio State love ever since Doug left the program. So I'm glad that we get back to business a little bit. And actually, I think that's the perfect place to start. So we're going to bring up Ohio State first, and I'm not just going to declare them a playoff contender right off the top. I think we feel pretty comfortable that this is a college football playoff contender. So I want to take it a little bit of a different direction with Ohio State. Is this actually the year? Is it realistic to think that this is a team that should expect to not just make the playoff, but be on the short list of national championship contenders?
Yes, but also it's a complicated yes, because I don't know at what point in the past 25 years that answer isn't yes, right? They're the most consistent team of this millennium. And you can even throw Alabama in there. Yes, what they did under Nick Saban was awesome, but there was also 8 or 9 years before Nick Saban got there when they weren't as awesome while Ohio State was winning national titles. But for the sake of answering the question, I think this is the roster that has maximized the chances of that happening under Ryan Day, right? I mean, you're talking about a coach that's had C.J. Stroud and Justin Fields as his quarterbacks at one point. Justin Fields got to the national championship game, but C.J. Stroud, not a great defense in his 2 years as Ohio State starting quarterback. Justin Fields, not a great defense in 2020, right? Last year, probably the best defense in the country. Not a great quarterback, though. So you end up trading one for the other side. We'll see with Will Howard and Devin Brown, not only how that battle plays out, but who ends up, if they can get back to that. Can they get back to the Heisman Trophy level, first-round draft pick level that we've come to expect from Ohio State? But the defense, this is the best defense in the country. It's like you lost Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Hall and Tommy Eichenberg, and it's just okay, we'll just throw in a Caleb Downs right here. We'll throw in a Quinshon Judkins over here. And so, yeah, I think this roster, top to bottom, we might get out of that Oregon game and just think there's no flaw. So, yeah, to answer that part of the question, I don't think there's been a better chance for Ryan Day to win a national championship so far than there is this year.
It's such a contrast in some ways. As somebody who has been around the Big 12 for a long time and remembered watching Will Howard when he was a freshman who was not very good at Kansas State, obviously he is a different kind of quarterback than what Ohio State has had. And I think you even look at the running backs that they brought in. And I'm curious from your perspective, stylistically, I think that we've seen, at one point this was almost like a borderline air raid team with the way that they chucked it around the yard. Last year was kind of more of a balance. Is that a conscious decision to try to be more physical and more run based, or is it more like this is just the best personnel that we can bring in?
I think it's personnel based. There was a time when it did feel like it was with a purpose to be that tough. I remember after the Notre Dame game in 2022, Ryan Day was being asked, "Hey, did you want to do it that way?" And he's like, "Yes, I wanted to run the ball. I wanted to prove we could do it." There was almost this hangover of what had happened in Ann Arbor in 2021, where I think we all came out of that second half thinking, this Ohio State team's not very tough. They don't have it in the trenches. And I think Ryan Day at some times over the last couple of years has tried to do things to prove otherwise. And then obviously what Lou Holtz said last year probably doesn't help in that conversation, right? But there's been this conscious effort from Ryan Day to go, hey, we're tough. And it's like, who cares? You have CJ Stroud, throw the ball, And so now I think what you saw last year, I think you're right, Shehan. You saw balance last year. I think this year, if I had to say what the offense might look like, probably similar to 2019 with Justin Fields, where you got a quarterback who can use his legs a little bit and can push the ball down the field. You still got Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, and Brandon Ennis are expected to do more this year. And then there's this kid named Jeremiah Smith. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's pretty decent, right? But Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson are going to be the engine of this team offensively, the way we saw with J.K. Dobbins when he had 2,000 yards in 2019.
We've all heard about the Oregon game. Everyone's circling that, going the Autzen. What is another game that you think is going, and at Penn State, obviously the game is going to be a huge factor, but are there any other games that you think might potentially trip up the Buckeyes?
Day's done a good job of not having that happen, right? That was like the Urban Meyer thing of, his teams are good, but they also lose to Purdue and they lose to Iowa. They also lose to Michigan State when you have clearly the best team in the country. Day hasn't had that issue. But if by that classification, obviously we all have our eyes on the Michigan game, on the Penn State game, and the Oregon game. But that Iowa game the week before the Oregon game is probably the best case scenario for a trap game. It's at Ohio State, yes, but it's the week before a game that at worst is number 2 versus number 3, right? But also Ohio State's schedule leading into that Iowa game isn't, pretty, right? They're playing some MAC schools. They're playing Michigan State, which is starting over again. But we've also seen Ohio State bully Michigan State for much of the past 3 or 4 years here. So that Iowa game just might be the first time they play a competent football team defensively. Offensively is a joke still. But it's the first time we see them play somebody competent. And so it's when you spent 4 weeks basically playing preseason games where you're not expecting your starters to play past halfway through the third quarter, and then you got to wrap it up all of a sudden. What does that look like? Do you start a little slow, and do we get out of that game? And because this is what we do for a living and we have to talk about something, we all go, oh no, is Ohio State in trouble, right? It probably not, but you don't play anybody for 4 weeks. And then week 5, you end up playing a team who at least we expect to be quality in the Big Ten. And when that competition rises, does it lead to maybe a slower start for Ohio State?
All right, so let's go ahead and figure out where are you going to classify them. It sounds like CFP contender.
Yeah, I think that's their floor. CFP contender. If they don't make the playoff, we have a whole nother problem on our hands here.
Easy choice, CFP contender.
Yeah, probably the easiest choice we've had so far in this series. All right, moving on next. A team in my neck of the woods out here in the Twin Cities, don't you know? We've got the Gophers. They went 6-7 last season, but they were, of course, the Quick Lane Bowl champions, which, of course, we can't necessarily say Ohio State won their bowl game. These aren't, but, again, it's not the easiest schedule. Honestly, it's courtesy of tradition. When you look at their schedule, it's terrible, but it's also because they're all their trophy games. How are we going to place the Gophers this season?
So I think they're just a middle-class team in the Big Ten still, right? Even when you add 4 teams to the conference, I still think they're there. Yes, you mentioned they went 6-7 last year, but 9-4 the last couple of years. They've been a quality team, and I think they kind of missed their window to make the jump. I think after the 2019 season, we were all maybe expecting, hey, Minnesota, PJ Flex got something cooking over there. They just won 11 games. And I think COVID just messed up everybody who wasn't the 3 best teams in college football. So they took a step back. They at least scared Ohio State in 2021. I know I'm talking from an Ohio State perspective, but that's just how I cover. So that's who I cover. But 9-4, 9-4, 6-7. Maybe they take the leap back the other direction. And tough schedule, though. Tough schedule. So it's they're experienced in some spots. I know they lost their quarterback to Rutgers, but they're experienced in some spots. And I am wondering if maybe they can just pull a couple of upsets. Or are we talking about a team where when coaches every single week are asking about them, they're like, they're better than what their record is? It's like, yeah, they actually are better than what their record is. They just have a bunch of really tough teams on their schedule.
Well, you mentioned, of course, losing Athan Kaliakmanis to Rutgers. They feel like Max Brosmer coming in from New Hampshire has the potential to be a big-time player for them. He was, I believe, a finalist for the Walter Payton Award as the best player at the FCS level, and I think that this has the potential to be something that really works. I'll also point to Tyler Williams as a wide receiver coming over from Georgia. I'll also point to some of the edge players that they added, like Jackson Howard from LSU. I think this is a more talented team in 2024 than 2023. And look, I mean, they had such a blessing with consistency at that quarterback position for so many years, with Tanner Morgan playing 7 years of college football. I think that Max Brosmer has the chance to come in, bring a level of stability for them. And we already know, I mean, they're good in the trenches. They run the ball well. They play tough defensively. The schedule is an issue. They open with North Carolina, though not Drake May. North Carolina is at least a benefit. I think this is a bowl team. I think this is a middle-class team. And again, I mean, I'd love to see some progress towards maybe having another up year in 2025.
Yep, we'll see how they do for the battle for the pig, the jug, the contrived bell, and the axe. Can't wait to see how that goes. All right, let's go ahead and kind of circle up our conversation with Steven on Ohio State's primary rival, the Michigan Wolverines. Obviously, last season went about as well as they could hope, even with what was going on off the field. Sharon Moore is now the first-year head coach, having moved up. Should be a great defense. Should be some good talent on the offense, although a lot of new faces on the offense. There's no Harbaugh. They have 13 NFL draft picks. Where do we put expectations for the Wolverines?
I think it's hard to not overreact to losing that much at Michigan, because you're not just talking about a first-round quarterback in J.J. McCarthy. You're talking about your head coach. You're talking about the fact that your head coach stole a lot of the foundational pieces, right? They lost their strength and conditioning coach there. They lost some coordinators there. Sharon Moore starting from scratch. We're not even sure what's going on with the quarterback situation. It's a lot of options, but I don't know if there are a lot of good options, right? It's just we're 6 months removed from Michigan winning a national title, and it feels like Ohio State's in a better spot, right? Just think about where we were with those two programs the night of the national title. Ohio State's kind of hitting rock bottom. They're losing to Michigan, losing to Missouri to close out the year, losing their quarterback to the transfer portal, while Michigan's holding up a trophy and about to have a heyday in the NFL draft in a couple months. And it feels like, which one of these teams won a national title again? Oh, yeah, it was the team who doesn't feel like it has a bright future. I'm going to put them in the middle class, even though I wouldn't necessarily be shocked if they are bottom tier this year, or if they're a contender and we're all just wrong here, right? I think about LSU after 2019. That was a super team, man. And they killed it in the draft, and they killed it all year. And then all of that left, right? Obviously, Ed Orgeron stuck around, but so much of that left. They ended up being a 500 team the next year. And then they went 6-7 the next year. It was just almost like a team randomly wins 15 games, wins a national title, and then goes right back where they belong. And is that on the table for Michigan this year? And that's why I put them in the middle class, where they finally just peaked. And we've seen that in college football, but you don't stay there. LSU, Auburn was like that, where you peak and then you go right back to where you belong almost immediately. And they've been a middle class team for much of the past decade here. And I'm wondering, when you lose that much foundation from your program, that was the key to what you did the last 3 years, I don't know if you can stay at the contender level. And I think you might even be closer to bottom tier than you are just being at the top of the middle class.
Yeah, I view them in a very funny and different way as like being on my Iowa State line of the Big Ten, where obviously, like, look, I mean, Michigan's probably going to be better than Iowa State this year, but like, at the same time, it's kind of like they're right on that top line of middle for me, or right on that bottom line of contender. I think what you have to look at defensively, they still have a lot. Like they still have a lot. Their defensive tackle combo is going to be the best in the country, most likely, with Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. Their secondary, also top 5 in the country potentially. It's really, I mean, I hate to always reduce these things to quarterback, but I don't know what they're planning to do there. I don't know what their game plan is. Now, is it impossible that they come through and maybe Alex Orji has like a Jalen Milroe type season? I don't think it's impossible, but I think that they'll need to potentially use him a lot more as a runner than necessarily as a passer. They were afraid to use him even in their other packages as a passer last year, even off of some of those counters. Like, I don't know that they can expect to have even like league average passing play, even if their quarterback situation is all right. So for me, I had decided to put them as well at the top of my middle tier. I think this is an 8 or 9 win team, one that doesn't really get close to contending for the Big Ten, but one who I think is still going to be able to give teams a scare. The other thing that I don't love for them is that they get Texas in week 2 in the non-conference slate. And this feels like the exact kind of game that Texas wins and then jumps to like number 2 in the country. And then, you head into the rest of your slate. You get Ohio State, you get Oregon, you get at Washington, you get versus USC. I think that none of those games are just impossible for them, but they're going to be probably underdogs in at least 3 of those games as well. So this is a team, again, that I think probably gets into the 8-win range. I think that would be a great start for the Sherrone Moore era. But again, like there's a Harbaugh-ness about Michigan whenever they were good, that like they just found ways to squeeze every ounce out of these teams. And I don't know that Sherrone Moore deserves that benefit of the doubt, even if he has the opportunity to prove us wrong this year.
Well, Stephen, before we let you go, who do you think, in your opinion, is the best player in this conference and the most underrated player in this conference?
This feels like a cop-out, unfair answer, because I think the top of that list is filled with a bunch of guys who technically have never played a Big Ten football game before. But it's Caleb Downs, man. The dude, second team consensus All-American last year as a true freshman. And it's just like, they didn't need Caleb Downs. I'll say they didn't need Caleb Downs for their defense to be good. But, I mean, you take him, right? You take that guy who was clearly the jewel of the transfer portal when Nick Saban retired here. I mean, they finished second the first time around, and so Nick Saban's retirement opened the door for that. But that's the best safety in the country, and I think right now he's the best player in the Big Ten, even though he's never played a game in the Big Ten whatsoever.
So underrated.
This one's a harder one. I think – you know what? I'm going to take a flyer on this kid because I don't know if I 100% even believe in him myself yet, which probably helps make my point here. Drew Aller struggled last year. He struggled. Let's just be real here. He did not look like a dude who was once rated as a 5-star recruit. Now, there's context with that, and him being from Ohio, I know that context. He was a late bloomer and played in an offense his senior year where they just kind of ran the air raid up in Northeast Ohio, and so nobody had an answer for that. But he struggled last year. And so what did James Franklin do? He got rid of his coordinator, got rid of his quarterback's coach, and kind of pressed the refresh button. So what if Drew Aller hits, right? What if he takes that jump that we've seen 5 stars take from year 1 as a starter to year 2 as a starter? Then we're talking about a different conversation with Penn State, right? I think right now everyone's looking at Ohio State and Oregon. And it's like, okay, which one of those guys is going to win the first game? And then who's going to win in Indianapolis at the end of the season, right? What if Drew Aller is the best quarterback in the Big Ten, or not even the best quarterback in the Big Ten, because Dylan Gabriel exists, Will Howard exists. There's some good quarterbacks. But what if he's like top 3, right? What if he starts to show us why he was a 5-star, and now all of a sudden that Penn State-Ohio State game gets real interesting in a way that, especially since it's at Penn State. So I'll say, just because I also don't fully believe in it right now, I think maybe he's just not going to be that good. But there's always a what if. So I'll say Caleb Downs is the best player in the Big Ten, even though he's never played in a Big Ten game. And I'll say Drew Aller right now, most underrated player in the Big Ten, where we could get to like week 7 and be going, man, nobody saw this coming, but here he is. He's the best quarterback in the conference.
Before we let you go, Stephen, could you let our listeners know where they can read your stuff and follow you?
Yeah, man. Here we go. This is the whole full breakdown, guys. First of all, you guys should definitely get the text 614-350-3315. We give a lot of our information through that. First, it's a 2-week free trial, $3.99. After that, I promise you, you won't regret signing up. But also, if you do, it's easy to quit. Just press stop and just say stop and you can quit. But read our stuff at cleveland.com/OSU. You can follow me at Steven_Means on Twitter. And listen to Buckeye Talk wherever you find podcasts. I think we're pretty much everywhere. So I think that's the full rundown. Get the text, listen to the pod, follow me, and go read cleveland.com/OSU.
We really appreciate it, man. Thanks for joining us. It's been a good conversation.
Thank you, guys. Anytime.
Excellent. So when we come back, we'll look at the next second half of part one of our Big Ten breakdown on the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
All right, we're back, and we're with Bob Flounders. He covers Penn State football and recruiting for PennLive.com. He's covered the program for over 20 years and is co-host of Penn Live's Blue White Breakdown podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Guys, it's great to be on the show. The fact that we're talking we're almost in mid-July. We could say it's mid-June, excuse me. It's nice to know that the off-season and spring practice is over with, and media days are right around the corner, which means August practices are right around the corner, which means, the end of August and the start of the season is right around the corner. Because it's been, it gets a little depressing for me without college football. It could be a little bleak in February and March because spring practice really isn't what it used to be. Let's be honest. They really don't do that much. They don't really say that much. You're more concerned with the transfer portal, who might leave. Are the new guys going to be any good? Are the freshmen going to play? But I think rosters are pretty much, a lot of them are solidified, and it's just going to come down to, and in the Big Ten this year with the addition to the Pac-12 teams, it should be a fascinating year. Penn State's got a really, really interesting schedule, and I'm real curious to see how it's going to play out for them.
Hey, this offseason, we got some riveting legal settlement action that also took place during these dull months. Oh, my goodness. But let's go ahead and launch into this. So the next team that we're going to talk about are the Iowa Hawkeyes. Obviously, they, without much of an offense, they still managed to win 10 games, and that really kind of came to a head in the Citrus Bowl where they helped the Vols feel good about Nico Iamaleava. So, but, Kirk Ferentz is back. It's 26th season. They got Tim Lester now. Should be a good defense as always. They've got strong returning talent on both sides of the ball. Cade McNamara should be QB number one. Is this the season of an offensive, well, I don't want to say renaissance, but maybe an offensive pulse? And where should we place these Hawkeyes?
I'll start. Kirk Ferentz might be back, but Brian isn't. First of all, that's an important distinction. Penn State's played Iowa a bunch of times, during James Franklin's time. I'm thrilled that the Big Ten West is really that the fact that that's no more. It was real. I think, you play all year and that probably the three best teams are in the Big Ten East. Probably every once in a while, Wisconsin was okay, but the Big Ten title game was it was unwatchable. It really was. There've been very few of them that were competitive. As far as Iowa moving forward, with more talented teams coming into the conference, and maybe you look at a couple of teams like Nebraska, or even Wisconsin, with Matt Rule at Nebraska, and it was a tough year for Luke Fickell in year one, but he was trying to change the culture in the program there. I just think that even Minnesota, I don't know. I honestly don't know where Iowa fits anymore. You have to be able to score some points if you're going to do anything. You cannot try and win games 16-13. And go very far in college football anymore. This is a team that I think, if it was 15 years ago, if it was 10 years ago, you could take them a little bit more seriously. But boy, they do churn out a lot of NFL talent, but they do not churn out a lot of NFL talent at the offensive skill positions. And with the way the rules are and the way the offenses are, you got to be able to outscore teams more often than not, and they can't do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that for me, they're a middle tier team heading into 2024. They did, by the way, the Big Ten West is gone. They managed to convince the Big Ten that they had many, many, many important rivalry games against teams that happened to be mediocre that they needed to maintain. So brilliant on their part. Beth Getz, their athletic director, is clearly, she's a baller. She knows exactly what she's doing. but they still do get Ohio State. They still get Washington. That Nebraska game last year was one that went down to the wire. They got Iowa State in the non-conference slate. So it's not certainly an especially difficult Big Ten schedule, but there are some stumbling blocks there. I think also a player who they never really got to have was Caden Proctor, the left tackle. If he had come in, I think he could have solved a lot of problems for them on the offensive line. But, look, I think that the gravy train of being able to ride the Big Ten West to a conference championship game is out the door in a lot of ways. And I don't think, some people think, I was going to be like falling to the middle, like the true middle, like fighting for bowl eligibility. I don't think they're going to be there, but this is like a solid 8-win team that really doesn't compete for the Big Ten or for the college football playoff. So that's where I'm going to put them going in.
Not bad, not bad. I mean, that schedule isn't that strong, but we'll move on to one of the other. It's so funny with all the new teams coming in. We'll call them one of our Big Ten classic teams, Rutgers. 7-6 last season. They are our reigning Pinstripe Bowl champions over Miami, which is still funny to even think about that, considering what Miami might be this season. So Greg Schiano's on the 5th season of his return, a 16th season overall, heading the team in Piscataway. They have a solid running game with the Big Ten's leading rusher, Kyle Monaga, returning for his 5th season in Piscataway. They've got a good defense that's returning. A lot of starters are returning on both sides of the ball. That schedule isn't too bad. Where are we going to put the Scarlet Knights?
Boy, I mean, so Penn State's seen a ton of Rutgers, and it just stands out to me that I'm pretty sure Rutgers has not, since they joined the Big Ten in 2014, they haven't beaten Penn State, but I don't think they've scored a touchdown in any games at Beaver Stadium. It's that bad. I don't see a huge when it comes to like style of play and what the final score might be in a game. I don't see a huge difference on a neutral field between Rutgers and Iowa. I know that sounds a little harsh to Hawkeyes fans, but you got to remember who Iowa has to play every year in the Big Ten West and who Rutgers had to play every year in the Big Ten East. They got Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State every year. They're in a tough spot, right? Where are they going to get their recruits? The Penn State's right next to them. Ohio State's not that far away. When Jim Harbaugh was at Michigan, he immediately established a pipeline into New Jersey and got the best players from New Jersey. I think he put one of the prominent high school coaches on his staff. I just don't know where they go. They've always struggled at the quarterback spot. I'm not sure what their NIL program really looks like. They are hard to play, but again, the margin for error for Rutgers against a team that is more talented or extremely talented is so thin that they have to play a perfect game just to stay close and hope. But they're not going to. When you look at the Big Ten and what they're trying to do, I understand why they're in the Big Ten. I understand why Jim Delaney wanted to add them to the Big Ten because of where they are. But they just don't really kind of belong. I don't see it ever changing at Rutgers. I just think it's an impossible situation. And they might always threaten to win 4, 5, 6 games, but when the going gets tough, they just are out athleted consistently, and it's unfortunate. I think Greg Schiano obviously knows what he's doing, and you mentioned the running back, tough kid, but they lean on him so much that by the end of the year he's so beat up. He's a guy. I mean, you look at the Chiefs and Pacheco, right? A Rutgers kid that has really the last 2 years helped them tremendously. But this guy, by the time he leaves Rutgers, is going to be so beat up. I don't know if he can make an NFL roster because he's not going to have any tread left on his side. For me, they're not really a factor in the Big Ten, and I don't see them ever being a factor in the Big Ten.
Yeah, so they made a bowl game last year. I think that must be said, and like a real bowl game. They actually made it to 6 wins and finished with a winning record. None of this APR stuff. But, such a big part of their past couple of years and that slow build under Greg Schiano was they had these bad non-conference slates that they were able to take advantage of and have 3 free wins. Well, they go to Virginia Tech this year. That's, I think, going to be a much tougher game than it was last season. And look, I mean, they are a program that I do think that moving out of that Big Ten East, you kind of alluded to it, Bob, that there is some level setting, I think, that comes with it, where you're not just going to be shoved underwater the same way. They don't have Ohio State this year. They don't have Penn State this year. They don't have Michigan this year. Like, really, their toughest games in conference are probably like at USC versus Washington. So they're right on that borderline of bottom to middle tier. I think I lean bottom, though. I think that, especially coming off of that game against Virginia Tech, having to play Washington in their first game, go to Nebraska, which will be a tough game, play Wisconsin at home, I think that they end up being just like, again, on the top end of that bottom. But I do have a lot of respect for what Greg Schiano has done there, because it is, I mean, you mentioned it, it's kind of a thankless job in a lot of ways. And you mentioned all the Big Ten teams that are going into New Jersey now. Somebody that we talked about a couple weeks ago was Fran Brown at Syracuse, who is like the king of New Jersey in a lot of ways. And I don't think that's going to help either. So they're a bottom tier team in 2024, but I wouldn't be shocked if they're able to play their way into the middle class.
It's so funny listening to how you guys are talking about this. I'm picturing, Iowa being let loose into a forest with predators now suddenly. But I'm meanwhile seeing climbing out of the forest, Rutgers looking half beat up, like, and seeing open field. Because again, as Sean pointed out, like, they got Wisconsin, they're at USC, which is for them is going to be an 11 p.m. local game. And then to their credit, they've made UCLA's their homecoming game, and it's going to be at like, again, that'll be a fun one. I hope they schedule it at noon, because that would be just hilarious for UCLA. It's so fun. It's wacky to see how this is all going to shake down. But moving on to another team, kind of will sort of play some interesting enough, is Northwestern. Because again, last season, boy, that season seemed like it was going to go off the rails before it even began. And then somehow David Braun was able to get an 8-5 season out of it. They beat Utah in the Las Vegas Bowl. Lots of weird stories going on, because obviously they don't have a home stadium because they're rebuilding Ryan Fields. It's going to be partially at Martin Stadium, a lacrosse field on the lake, which will have temporary stands. And then those cowards, they moved Ohio State to Wrigley Field, because I would have loved to have seen them play on that temporary stadium. And Illinois will also be there.
Tell all the Chicago-based Ohio State fans that there are 12,000 seats for them.
Well, no, they're gonna find like some tall boat or something and just like sail it up close.
Finally, we can add a 14 that does sailgating with Baylor, Washington, and Tennessee. It'll be great.
They do have one of the rougher rides through the conference, though, because they get Wisconsin at Iowa, Ohio State, and at Michigan. My goodness. So, Bob, where are we putting the Wildcats?
Penn State played at Northwestern last year, and that was a team that was really. Yeah, it looked like the sky was falling, right? With what happened with Pat Fitzgerald and all that stuff. A Northwestern legend. Led him to the Rose Bowl in the mid '90s. But they played Penn State off their feet for 3 quarters. They always take advantage of those 11 a.m. starts, though, against good teams. They always try and get those games right. It's bright, and there's only about 15,000 seats at their old stadium, and it's just one of those things where they kind of catch them napping a little bit, and then they wake up, and it's not as bad as it looks. But again, it's just hard to see a path for them consistently being a contender, let's say, or a winning program in the Big Ten. Even when Fitzgerald was there, it seemed like every other year or every third year, they would be in the Big Ten West. They would be a candidate, and they're not too far removed. I think in 2020, they went to the Big Ten title game, and they actually had Ohio State in trouble until the second, even the fourth quarter of that game. But again, it's about athletes. It's about all that. I do think they are a team that is always going to be well coached. But the problem is when they're well coached, the coach doesn't tend to stay there that long, right? He's going to go someplace else. I just think they are. I think they're closer, to middle of the pack than Rutgers, but they're probably a little bit below Iowa. They're somewhere, wherever that level is, that's kind of where I have them. I would love to see that facility get built. I would love to see a little bit of a resurgence. It's a great venue. I personally think Chicago is the best city in the United States. It's an easy flight. There's so much to do. I wouldn't necessarily go there in January or December, but I just think they have a lot going for them. But again, eventually it's going to come down to, how many players can they get out of the Midwest at a tough school that can be difference makers. They do put players in the NFL at a lot of different positions, but they just don't have enough of them. I think that's where I'd put them. A little below Iowa, but definitely above Rutgers.
Yeah, so I think that for me, this is a team last year that was probably the most surprising 8-win team in the country last year, especially with the way that they played their first 3 games. It felt like it was going to just go off the rails, but it just never really did. And that overtime game against Minnesota, I think they got a lot of confidence from that. I mean, people were talking about this as a potential team that could go like 1-11 or 0-12, and they really found their level. And the thing I'll say too, I love this coaching staff. Love this coaching staff. David Braun, of course, coming from the North Dakota State tree. And actually, when you talk about who they brought in as an offensive coordinator, Zach Lujan coming from South Dakota State, which has kind of overtaken North Dakota State as like the it program right now in the FCS. So this is a brain trust that I have a lot of faith in. And I think that they know what they want to be. They know what they are. I think even at the end of Pat Fitzgerald's tenure, and they made that title game during COVID in 2020. I don't know how much like you take from that, but other than that, it was like 5 straight years of declining results. And it felt like a shot in the arm that still was very true to the previous culture. I mean, to make, obviously my Big 12 self, to make a comparison in some ways, like it felt like when Bill Snyder retired and Chris Kleiman comes in at Kansas State, and it's like, it's different, but it's the same in so many ways. And so I really like this team. I really like this coaching staff. I don't think that they have a chance to have a winning record in conference like they did last year. I think that they are going to take a step back record-wise, but I think they will still be good enough to make a bowl game. I expect them to be more like a 4-5 team in conference. And to me, that puts them firmly in the middle tier. Bobak, you're kind of a deciding vote for us. Are we going to put them in that middle tier?
I think a lot of the points you made are valid ones. I do believe in the coaching staff. I do believe in the fact, especially last year, like I said, the Penn State game, you look at the final score of that game and you think, boy, Penn State just had it. Well, it was not that way at all. They had their hands full till late in the third quarter. I do think this is I would put them somewhere in the middle, but I don't know that I wonder if we're ever going to have a conversation where we put them anywhere higher than the middle. I just think there's just too many predators out there, right? Between the new additions and some other teams, I think within the conference that may be getting their acts together. Whether it's Bielema at Illinois, whether it's Nebraska, whether it is Wisconsin, kind of regaining their footing. If all of that happens, even Minnesota, PJ Fleck, I think. Doesn't sometimes get the credit he deserves. But I just think there's just so many obstacles in their path. I think every year the middle of the pack is going to be about the best case for Northwestern.
Yeah, I think you're right. That might be their ceiling in most years. So moving to another team, kind of a somewhat semi-new addition, Nebraska. So last season, Matt Rule's first season, taking over an interesting rebuild job on a team that has been dormant for an awfully long time. They managed to go 5-7. They flirted with bowl eligibility fairly early on, but it didn't quite work out. The story of the offseason is Dylan Raiola. You bring in a superstar quarterback who sounds like he might be as good as advertised in all the early returns. You got Tony White, who leads that great defense. Is this the season, really, that they're going to go bowling under the rural restoration plan, or are they going to go a little bit further? It'll be interesting to see. They've got, again, some tough sledding with some of these games. It'll be really interesting to benchmark them against Colorado and that, because, again, that is their hated rival. It'll be fun to see how that sorts out early on in the season. But then they go to Ohio State, they go to USC, they go to Iowa, and then they got a Wisconsin coming into town. So where do we put the Cornhuskers?
Well, I would say I actually have a confession. I grew up as a Nebraska fan, even though I'm from Pennsylvania. They were the first game I ever saw on TV was Nebraska, Oklahoma, the day after Thanksgiving, I think it was. And this is dating me. It was in the 70s, so you're going to have to bear with me. So I had to pick one of those two teams. I picked Nebraska, stuck with them. Hey, man, it was great in the 90s and in the 80s, but ever since Tom Osborne stepped aside, Frank Solich was good for a little bit, but it's just been a descent into hell for college football. They've been embarrassed. They've been not, Scott Frost, to me, it was stunning to see him fail the way that he did. I thought for sure that if anyone could get it going, it would be because he had success right at Oregon, I think, as the play caller at UCF, but it just did not happen. I do think Matt Rule kind of gets it. I do think he is a program builder. If you can win at Temple, because they beat the stuffing out of Penn State to open the 2015 season at the Eagles Stadium, 27-10. That was a pretty formidable Temple team. If you can win at Baylor the way that he did, I think he can turn the corner at Nebraska. A lot of it's going to come down to how good Raiola is. He certainly looks the part, right? But they've had some quarterbacks that, whether I think it was Adrian Martinez was one, Taylor Martinez. They've had some exciting quarterbacks, but they really haven't had, the full arsenal around them. I think, Matt Rule knows how to win in college football. I think he will build a team around him. I think he can recruit. Their record in one possession games, the amount of games they've lost, one possession losses, is truly astounding. I do think they will take a step forward in year 2 under Matt Rule. I do think they will go to a bowl game, but I just don't know. I mean, can they sustain it, right? I mean, they might sneak up on some teams this year just because I don't know that anyone really feels threatened by Nebraska. But if the quarterback's good, right, that's how it starts. They have to. They're not bringing the option back, guys. Unfortunately, they're not bringing the option back. There's only so much they can do with their walk-on program. Those are two mainstays for Tom Osborne. I think they're going to make the playoffs this year. I think they're going to beat a couple teams people don't expect them to beat. Colorado might be one of them. But I'm real curious to see what Raiola can do at Nebraska, because if he doesn't get it done, like, how are they ever going to land another quarterback with a resume like his?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think that I want to say this is the program with the longest active bowl drought in all of Power Conference football, which just feels incredible. Like that feels impossible, because
Wow.
Rutgers has been back to a bowl last year. Kansas has been back to a bowl. Like, every single of the bottom feeder teams have been back to a bowl since this all happened. Colorado in 2020 under Carl Durrell made a bowl. So I think let's level set with that. This is going to be a bowl team, absolutely. They've got a very favorable schedule, by the way. That Colorado game is going to be a lot of fun in week 2. It's an NBC game, one of the first NBC games that we get. That's going to get crazy ratings. But Illinois at Purdue, Rutgers at Indiana, at Ohio State, okay, probably a loss. Versus UCLA, at USC will be a good game. Versus Wisconsin will be a good game, at Iowa. So, like, this could easily be a 9-win team when it's all said and done. And look, I mean, do I think that they're going to be able to break to upset Ohio State? I don't necessarily see that. Yeah, I don't know. I have them again right on that line between middle tier and playoff contender. I think I'm going to play it a little conservative and go middle tier. So we've got one for playoff contender. We got one for middle tier. Bobak, you are our deciding votes.
It's a big jump. It's a big jump. I mean, I see him in a bowl game. I do believe they're going to beat at least one team. No one really. I do think that's what they got Matt Rule for. I think he can do that. I think he's done it at other schools, and I do think he knows how to win close games, and I do think he knows how to get guys to play to their full potential. As far as a playoff team, I would say it is a bit of a stretch, but I'd be really surprised if they do not. And I'm not saying back into a bowl or luck into a bowl game or win a tiebreaker or whatever. I think they're going to earn their bowl invite. And the question is, Bo Pelini. I'm dating myself, but he turned it around for them in 2008 when they had Indomitian Kinsu. They didn't have anything else. I think he was the runner-up for the Heisman. And they finished the season very strong. They destroyed Arizona in a bowl game. And first thing he said was Nebraska is back. And they weren't back. They just could not replicate that feeling. They didn't have Indomitian. They didn't have Sue for the rest of his career. But it's just really tough to do. I want to see if they can make a bowl game 3 or 4 years in a row. I want to see if they can build up their NIL program. I want to see if recruits start to take notice and they can consistently get maybe top 25 classes, because that's what it's going to take, because one of them isn't going to be enough. I'm very confident they're going to go to a bowl game this year. I wouldn't be surprised if they won 8 or 9 games, and I bet you they upset a team and you're not going to see it coming, but they're probably also going to lose to a team that you didn't see coming either. That's going to even it out. I don't see playoff for them, but I could see 8 wins pretty easy and maybe 9.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's certainly going to be probably a middle-class team. I'm with you on this one, Shehan. So moving on to a team that might be here in the we'll see where we rank them. We got the Indiana Hoosiers. Now, last season didn't go so well. They finally let go of Tom Allen, who of course landed elsewhere, and we'll get to that a little bit later. They went 3-9, 1-8 in the Big Ten, but they brought in Curt Cignetti, the great coach from James Madison. It's obviously a first season. They're probably going to be picked last in a lot of ratings of the conference, but they don't have that bad of a schedule. They've got a very easy non-con. They're going to be at UCLA. They host Michigan, and then they're at Ohio State. But there's still a lot of room for games in there. So I'd be really curious to know where you think those Hoosiers are going to land.
Well, I mean, they can't all be, somebody's in for a disappointment this year. I do think Cignetti is a very good coach. Tom Allen, when he was there, he had some really, really nice moments. He also had Michael Penix when he was healthy. He also had some really good defensive players. They were a pretty good team for a couple years there. They almost beat Penn State last year in State College, and they were not good. They kind of snuck up on them a little bit, but he was pulling a lot of recruits, I think, from Florida. Tom Allen was, and he had a little pipeline there because he had coached. He had coached down there, and he had a connection. I'll be curious to see where Indiana's going to get if they can get 4-star kids, because they're not going to get 5-star kids. If they can get some 4-stars, where are they going to come from? Are they going to have an NIL program that they can kind of lure some kids there? I think I would say, let's put it this way. I don't think they're going to be as good as Iowa. I think they're going to be better than Rutgers. Are they going to be better than Northwestern, the teams we've talked about? I don't think so. I think we're going to be talking and thinking more positive things about Indiana in year 2 for Cignetti than year 1. I do think he knows what he's doing. I do think he's won at other places, but I don't know. I just don't know how talented that roster is. I think 2 years from now or next year, I think they're going to be much more dangerous. But in this year, in this conference, where there's not a lot of like free weekends, right? There's very few days off in the Big Ten in conference play. It's going to be tough for them. I don't think they're going to a bowl game, and I just think it's going to be, you're going to think more about them positive wise in his second year.
Absolutely. This is going to be a vibe shift year, I think, in a lot of ways. One thing that you need to pay attention to is they brought in a top 30 transfer class. Curtis Rourke is a quarterback who people, if you don't watch the MAC, man, like he is a player that you need to keep an eye on. That Rourke family did wonders at Ohio. Now he's going to get a chance to do it in the Big Ten as well. And I mean, you kind of just look up and down this transfer class. It's former either James Madison stars or guys who are legitimate contributors at the power conference level as well. So I think this is going to be a much more competent team than what we saw, especially the last little bit. And they also have a quarterback of the future, by the way, and Tyler Cherry coming in from the state of Indiana, a 4-star prospect. So there is so much to like about this team long term. Medium term, short term, I don't know necessarily that they have the goods to make it happen. I think that they are a bottom tier team, but I mean, this is the kind of hire that I didn't think Indiana would try to make in a lot of ways with Kurt Cignetti coming in. He's won everywhere he's been. He's from that Kalen DeBoer mold of guys who just kind of rose up in college football, who coached first at I believe it was at the D2 level, then moves up to FCS, and obviously transitions James Madison up and basically has a team good enough to win the Sun Belt if they were eligible to do it last year. So this is a hire that I love. This is a staff that I'm really impressed by. I think they're going to have a chance to have some success there, but certainly I don't see it happening in 2024.
Definitely, yeah. I think they're going to have to prove folks otherwise in this initial season and see where they go. Kind of wrapping up this episode, we wanted to look at, again, a team that Bob knows really well, Penn State. Last season, 10-3, that Peach Bowl lost to their kind of SEC cousins at Ole Miss. James Franklin's back for his 11th season. This time he's got Andy Kotelnicki. He got him from Kansas. They've got some good talent, obviously a pair of great running backs. Drew Aller, who our previous guest Stephen Means thought was his underrated player in the conference, and one who I know Shehan has teased me about and also putting as one of my quarterbacks to look out for. He was at the bottom of my group, but I had to add somebody in our quarterback draft. And again, they've got Tom Allen. They brought him just from Indiana to be part of that defense that should be good as always, because they always have talent over in Penn State. So that's a question. Can they get over the hump? It almost seems like the 12-team playoff was created by some secret behind-the-scenes covert Nittany Lion operatives who wanted to make sure that the Nittany Lions can finally make it into a playoff. I'm not quite sure if that's what happened, but where do we place them? By the way, that opening game with West Virginia is going to be something else. That's going to be a real fun benchmarking game. But they've got a decent schedule out there with a 3-game stretch that includes at USC, at Wisconsin, then hosting Ohio State. So you're the expert on this, Bob. How do we look at these Nittany Lions?
I'm just going to tell you guys, they blew it last year. That team was built to – they should have won one of the – they should have either beat Michigan or they should have either beat Ohio State. Watching how Michigan played and came together during the season, the game that they really should have won was at Ohio State. Their offense just was not good enough. They had, there's Mike Yurcich. James Franklin has made offensive coordinator changes before, but you don't usually see it like that right after the Michigan game. A clear indicator that they were not on the same page. Offensively, they could not score. They could not score against either good defense that they faced in that bowl game. They didn't really show up. A couple kids opted out at the last second, and that was a pretty good Ole Miss team. Honestly, that's an Ole Miss team that I think is going to be heard from again this year, and that's a dangerous team just because of the way they can score points. But as far as this Penn State team it's hard for me to believe that this Penn State team is better than last year's team. Now, they have some players that are really, really good, but they lost a lot of good players off of that team. They lost 3 offensive linemen that are going to start at some point in their NFL careers. Olu Fashanu is a first-round pick. He's going to be starting at some point this year for the Jets. Caden Wallace was drafted by the Patriots. That team doesn't have much of an offense. He's going to start for them. Hunter Norzad, who was a portal guy from the Ivy League, went to the Chiefs, and I think they really like him. Those are 3 really good offensive linemen they lost. They lost Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac. They lost Curtis Jacobs. They lost a good tight end and Theo Johnson. They lost a lot. I think this schedule is actually tougher than last year's. I know that they don't – everyone's thinking because Michigan's not on the schedule this year that they have an easier time of it. I don't see it that way at all. The West Virginia game is going to be a lot harder than I think a lot of Penn State fans realize. They caught a break that it's a noon kick and it's not a night game because those crazy people, man, that is a tough environment to compete in. And that's a pretty good West Virginia team. They did play last year. They pulled away from them. I think they're going to have their hands full in the very first game against West Virginia. I don't think it's going to be easy at Wisconsin or at Minnesota. They are not beating Ohio State. Anyone who thinks that they are, it's not happening. Ohio State's winning it all this year. That team is stacked. I don't know what Stephen Means said, but this is going to be Ohio State's best team since 2015. They're built for it. I don't really think there's anyone on the schedule that can really stay with them. And I know Penn State gets them. I think there's at least 3 losses on this Penn State schedule, and it could be worse. I think a lot of people are like, well, Andy Kotelnicki is here and Mike Yurcich is gone, so everything's going to be different. I'm not so sure that I would put it all on Mike Yurcich. He was a crusty guy that was really hard to talk to, but he was also really good in 2022 when they went to the Rose Bowl. They scored a bunch of points against Ohio State that year. They beat Utah in the Rose Bowl. I think this team, a best case for me this year is 9-3. I do not have them making the playoff. I don't. I think they could lose 3 games. They could lose 4. My questions are just about the quarterback and the wide receivers. Honestly, they do not have any wide receivers that I could see on this roster that scare anyone. The running backs are good. I actually think Katron Allen is a better running back than Nick Singleton, but they're both going to play in the NFL. The offensive line will not be as good. Their front 4 is fearsome. They have a young linebacker that's going to be a star this year. But until I see James Franklin's record against good teams, especially on the road, it's not great, man. It is not. It's actually embarrassing. James, sorry if you're listening to this, but facts are facts. He's 1-9 against Ohio State. The one win was a miracle. A miracle in the whiteout game in 2016 when they blocked a punt to set up a field goal, and they blocked a field goal to score the winning points, or else they would not have beaten Ohio State in 10 tries with James Franklin. I need to see it to believe it. I think they're a good team. They're going to put a lot of players on this team in the league, and they're going to play at a high level. But there's just too many ifs and buts for this offense. I still need to see it from Drew Aller. He still needs to win a game in the fourth quarter against a good team. He's in his 3rd year now. Like, he's not a young player anymore. He certainly has the skill set, but I just don't know if he has the wideouts that can help him. I don't know if he has the offensive line that can protect for him. I have some questions about this Penn State team. I'd be happy to be wrong. Penn State fans know I'm wrong a lot. But I think last year was their year. I know the playoff has been expanded. I think it's going to be hard for them to get in the playoff.
Wow. That's fascinating. I mean, you are probably one of the first people that I've seen kind of come out this strong against what Penn State will be. I'm curious from your perspective. So, of course, like you mentioned, they bring in Andy Kotelnicki. And I guess that was interesting to me because Drew Aller doesn't feel exactly like an Andy Kotelnicki kind of quarterback. I mean, just from your perspective, how was that gone? I mean, he is an offensive coordinator that worked with Tyree Jackson at Buffalo, who worked with Jalen Daniels and Jason Bean at Kansas, guys who are more mobile. I mean, how has that transition been?
Yeah, and he's got a quarterback on the roster that believe me, I hear it from the fan base. The fan base wants to see more of Bo Prabula, who is like, he's never gonna have to buy a beer in State College again because he engineered 2 late scores for miraculous covers. One was at Northwestern, and one was early in the season against somebody. There was another one too where it looked like they weren't going to cover the number, and he played lights out in mop up time. Gifted athlete, legit. The running component is real. It really is. He told me in spring he felt like he made strides as a passer. Andy's absolutely going to have them both on the field at the same time. But you have to remember that James Franklin always wants to kind of have a little bit of a say in what's going on in every facet of his program, even if he denies it. He stuck with Sean Clifford for a long time, and it cost him Will Levis. Sean Clifford had a great final season and earned his way onto a Green Bay Packers roster. But it took him, I think that was his 6th year, right? James is very loyal to his starting quarterbacks. Tommy Stevens left for that reason, right? The more athletic quarterbacks sometimes aren't always on the field. I think Bo Prabula is going to play. I think it's going to take an injury to get him in a more prominent role. I don't know how good of a thrower he is, but I've also seen games where Drew Aller, who's got a cannon, is either he either misses some wide open throws or he throws the ball too hard. So I just, for all of that to come together and to look at that wideout room, and I'm looking at it and going, who in this room, Julian Fleming was a good Ohio State receiver, but I mean, he his best year, you look at the numbers, he was behind a lot of players. He's their best option. I just don't know. Do they have a 50 catch, 800-yard wide receiver? I know they like Tyler Warren, and that's great, but you have to be able to change a game on one play. And usually it's a guy like, so Penn State had KJ Hamler, right? He was good. Jahan Dotson was good. But they just they've missed on so many kids, or they've failed to develop so many kids. Chris Godwin would be the other guy. But other than that, they've missed on more than they've hit on. I don't know, when they played Ole Miss last year, Ole Miss isn't by no means, that was not a great defense. They could not score enough to beat Ole Miss. Ole Miss scored, I think, 38. They scored 25, and they scored a touchdown late. I have so many questions about their offense and whether or not they can consistently score in the high 20s or 30s against good teams to win games that are going to be toss-ups. I love their defense. I think their defense has some elite players, but I need to see it, and I just have not seen it nearly enough. And James has not been good in big games.
So, okay, let's take it to me. So, Ohio State, that's a loss. Absolutely. I don't think it's going to be all that competitive. When I look at the rest of the schedule, I definitely think there's another loss on there, but there's a lot of teams trying to figure themselves out too. So, at West Virginia, that's going to be an interesting game. That's going to be a tough game. I worry about West Virginia in the trenches. Like, I think that West Virginia is like that kind of Big Ten game that Penn State plays, that they don't look awesome, but they win just because they're able to set such a high floor. Illinois, UCLA wins. At USC, I mean, we don't really know what USC is going to be this year. That'll be kind of interesting, similar with Wisconsin in a lot of ways. Washington's lost too much. I think that's a win. At Purdue, at Minnesota versus Maryland. So, to me, I see a 10-2 team. And 10-2 to me is enough. Now, I think that in so many ways, and Bob, of course, you being around the program, you see this, this was set up with that 2022 recruiting class to be the year. This was set up to be you're going to have a second year Drew Aller, you're going to have a third year, these running backs, Abdul Carter, all these great players. And I don't know that it's looking like it's going to be that. But I still do have them in this top group, especially, again, when you talk about the legitimate top group, the only team right now that we have in the playoff contender category is Ohio State. And 3 teams, at least from the Big Ten, are going to make the college football playoff, some of whom we'll talk about on our next episode as well, certainly. But I think Penn State is in that conversation, is in that group. I'm going to pass it over to my co-host, who's going to be a deciding vote for us. Are they in the playoff conversation? Are they in the middle tier?
Well, Bob made some really great thoughts here. I can see where there's a potential for up to 4 losses, because certainly at the West Virginia game at USC, especially because it's at USC, Wisconsin and Ohio State are all potential. So I guess for me is, do I think they can make it through and win a couple of those games? This is a one where I'm going to actually give them a benefit of the doubt in the good direction. Rather, usually I'm like, no, they're probably not going to. But I think if there's going to be a year, this has got to be it. I mean, I think Drew Aller, this is also betting on whether or not he's going to have enough of an upside. But for this one, I think I'm going to lean a little bit higher and be the tiebreaker to put them, at least initially, as a college football playoff contender until they prove us otherwise.
I think I was just going to say, it's one thing to contend for a playoff spot. It's another to get there. My question to you guys is, if they're 9-3, are they in the playoffs?
I think that 9-3, I mean, they would be legitimately maybe the last team, right? They might legitimately be, Are they going to be 11 as the last at-large team, or are they going to be 12? I think that depending on who those losses are to, I think that they could potentially get in. Now, I will say, they only get one surefire playoff team on their schedule in Ohio State. They don't get Oregon on their schedule.
Right.
Even
Yes.
like Iowa would be another one that like I feel like would be a little more acceptable to lose. So I mean, looking at their schedule, yeah, I mean maybe 9-3 wouldn't be good enough to get in. Maybe they do need to go 10-2 to feel comfortable. But um, I just think that this is a program. I've referred to Penn State actually and Ole Miss in the SEC the similar way. There's so much the Mendoza line of the Big Ten. If you're better than them, I think you're a good team. If you're worse than them, I
Right.
don't think you're all that good.
That's right.
And Penn State's been that line for me, especially in the Big Ten this year with Michigan going through what they're going through right now, with Washington making a coaching change. I don't think that there are a lot of teams above that Mendoza line right now in terms of like legit national type awesome contenders. And so, look, I mean, I think this is going to be a good test for them because you replace Rutgers and some of these other teams that were in the Big Ten East with USC. You obviously get Wisconsin this year, so like there's going to be more from the perspective of teams that are close to that line that could go over that line than maybe in previous years. But I still see this as a team that. Again, last 2 years they've gone 7-2 in conference play. They had that blip in the middle of the James Franklin era, but otherwise they've been right in that 6 or 7 win conference range. So I think from my perspective, I feel like they're in a good spot to get in. And I've said before too on this podcast, the college football playoff in so many ways was created for teams like Penn State and Ole Miss, the ones who are like clearly not able to get over that hump of Georgia or Ohio State or Michigan or Alabama, but are still really, really good. Now, look, you got me questioning myself now when it comes to Penn State with some of the questions that you bring up, but I still think that for me they deserve that benefit of the doubt. But one thing you referred to as well is James Franklin at times has put his hands in places, especially on the offensive side, where maybe they don't belong. I think that whether Andy Kotelnicki is actually 100% in charge of the offense is going to be a big part of that conversation as well.
Just two things. I think we'll know pretty early what about this Penn State team because it's the West Virginia game. I think this West Virginia team could be a top 25 team fairly easily. They were a good team at the end of last year. They got to replace Zach Frazier, who is one of the best offensive linemen I've seen play at Beaver Stadium. He wrecked the interior of Penn State's defensive line. That's a big loss. The other thing I think is funny though is I think they're really going to. I mean, Penn State, whenever they play a good quarterback, there's not that many good quarterbacks in the Big Ten other than Ohio State. So while USC might have some defensive issues, and they will have, they're going to have that quarterback. I think that replaced Caleb was pretty good. He was pretty good in that bowl game. That I think is going to be a tougher game, I think, than people realize. My point, though, is if they would finish 9-3 and get in the playoff as like the 11th or 12th team, and Franklin, can puff his chest out and the fans can get excited. Where are they going to go in round one who are they playing in round one and how is that going to go for Penn State?
Probably Austin, Texas. Yeah, probably Austin, Texas.
They might be better off not in the playoff in that scenario.
Now I'm imagining them being 12th and being bumped by Liberty or something because they have to let in the G5 program.
Yeah, but they could have to go to like Texas or Georgia or Ohio State and Is that what you guys? I mean, I'm talking about the fans. Is that what you guys really want to see?
My goodness. Well, Bob, as we slowly wrap up this portion, who do you think is your best player going into this season in the Big Ten, regardless of position?
In the Big Ten. Oh, so in the Big Ten or on. I can go Penn State. I can go in the Big Ten.
Let's do the conference. Let's do the conference.
Okay. I'll tell you. I always struggle to pronounce this guy's name, but he has owned Penn State the last 2 years. JT Tuamalu from Ohio State, number 44. He single-handedly won the game at Beaver Stadium 2 years ago. You look at the fourth quarter of that game, and he made a couple of big plays last year. The fact that Ohio State was able to keep him in school tells you how good this Ohio State team is. He, to me, is a guy that I think he's got another level to him, but all I know is when he plays Penn State, bad things happen to Penn State's offensive line. He would definitely get my vote as the player that really stands out to me. I just wanted to say a couple of more things. I think one of the more underrated players in the Big Ten this year, I got to look at him last year in the Peach Bowl. Quinshawn Judkins, the kid from Ole Miss. If people are thinking that Travion Henderson is far and away the best running back on the team, he's really good. But Judkins, you look at his freshman year when Ole Miss had a good offensive line, he was unbelievable. Their offensive line wasn't even that good last year, and he still did a lot of damage. I think running, fresh behind that Ohio State offensive line, I think he could, by the end of the year, be better than Henderson. I think he's one of the best running backs in college football. He can make an impact as a receiver, and they got him to that 1-2 punch if they're both healthy. I just don't know how you deal with. I don't know how you deal with the Buckeyes for 4 quarters this year. Offensively, defensively, they got Chip Kelly running the offense. How good's that running game going to be? I am very, very, very. I'll be very surprised if they don't win it all this year. I think they're built to win it all this year. They've certainly spent enough money, but they've just impacted it in all ways. They're going to be a tough team. I would also say for Penn State, everyone's going to talk about Abdul Carter, the guy who's making the transition from linebacker to defensive end, and it's a hell of a player, right? He's a first-team All-Big Ten linebacker, dynamic player, can rush the passer, big-time athlete. He's added some weight. 2 other players to watch on that defense for sure. Kevin Winston, the safety, is spectacular. He first year starter last year. So he's only his 3rd-year player. 6'2", 205. I think he's maybe the best safety prospect they've ever had at Penn State. They don't have a big tradition of safeties. They've had some good ones. This guy is a top 30, 40 player draft-wise going into the season. He could play himself into probably the late first round. And just remember this name. It's hyphenated. Denai Dennis Sutton. Dennis Sutton's hyphenated. He's going to start at defensive end. He was their 3rd best defensive end last year behind Chop and Adisa. But physically, in his 3rd year, I think when he's done this year, he's going to be better than both of them.
Thank you so much for that great insight. Those are going to be some great players to look out for.
Remember those names, guys. And when Penn State goes 12-0 in the regular season, lose this phone number because I'm probably going to have to move. I'm going to have to relocate and cover another college football team.
So, Bob, before we get to that point in your career, so how can our listeners find you, read your stuff, listen to you in the shows you're on, follow you on social media? Where should they go?
Yeah, so the guy that I was on the beat with me, our longtime columnist that Penn State fans love and hate, David Jones, just a tremendously gifted writer. He retired. He has not come back. He's enjoying retirement in suburban Philadelphia. You can find my stuff. Johnny McGonigal's on the beat with me as well. We hired Max Ralph, who's fresh out of college from Penn State. He'll be on the beat too. But PennLive.com is where you guys can find us. We do podcasts in season 2 or 3 times a week. It's the Blue-White Breakdown. I'm at Twitter on Bobby Flo, BOBBYFLO7. That's my Twitter handle. I'll be there. But I enjoy podcasting. I don't have a face. I wish we just didn't have video because I have a face for radio. And so I love the podcast aspect of it, but I cringe when I see myself in YouTube videos. But I really enjoy meeting people, talking to people that know the Big Ten on podcasts. I thought you guys made some really good points about some other Big Ten teams. I think you made some really good points about Penn State, but I'm just a little hesitant. I just think that they need to show me in some key spots, in some close games, in some road games, that they can do it. Because even some of the teams that should have been, I know I'm rambling, even some of the teams that could have went to the playoff, like the 2016 team, absolutely. They should have went over Ohio State. They should have. They got trampled by Michigan early in the year. The next year, Saquon Barkley, that team was loaded. They should have beat Ohio State. They barely lose. And then they lost at Michigan State the next week. And that took them out of it. That was a really good team that walloped Washington in the Fiesta Bowl. They always seem to stumble. 2019, they lose at Minnesota with a really good team that had Micah Parsons and Etor Gross-Matos, Sean Clifford, KJ Hamler, Pat Freiermuth, Journey Brown before he couldn't continue playing. It's always something with Penn State, it seems like, during James Franklin's tenure. I hope this is different for the Penn State fans. I think that he's certainly recruited at a high level. His staff is very good, but they're going to be defined by 3 or 4 games this year. And I think they got to win they got to win almost all of them to get in the playoff. We'll see if they can do it.
Well, Bob, we appreciate your insights and having you join us. I'm going to go ahead and just take a second now to thank all of you who've been listening to us for this excellent, epic first part of our Big Ten breakdown heading into the season. Want to thank both our guests, Stephen Means and Bob Flounders, and our producer, Joey Aliberti. Be sure, if you can, to like, rate, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on X and TikTok at CFB Survivors Show. He's Shehan Jayaraja. You can find his work at cbssports.com and at Shehan Jayaraja on X and TikTok. I'm Bobak Hayeri, and I'm part of the team that runs Reddit CFB. Thanks, everyone.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.